in potentially December with you then.
You will, yeah.
Hadn't thought
Technically,
about
I
that.
wonder if I can still book these sales under like my November numbers because I'm hosting the call. I wonder how Scott would feel about that, Jarrad.
Yeah. Worth a shot.
Yeah, just double checking we are live where we need to be. And it all looks pretty good from where I am sitting, and it is 6:30 p.m. on the dot, Sydney, Melbourne time. Probably nowhere else in the world, not even Brisbane at the moment, but it's my great pleasure to welcome you virtually into the bowels of the Oak Barrel, what was the warehouse space and wine dinner degustation tasting room, which is now our little virtual studio setup. My name is Scott Fitzsimons, and I once again, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to this, to a very, very special tasting based off not just one very, very special release, but a very, very special relationship, I'm going to call it, over the past 6 or 7 years between ourselves here at the Oak Barrel and Starward. We have a plethora of guests literally from all around the world tonight. Sitting to my right, look probably to your left, is Mr. Lee Potter Cavanagh, brand ambassador for Starward and a few other craft Australian spirits here. Sitting below us at the moment is Jarrad Hucksold. I think we're calling him head blender at Starward at the moment, is this week's title. And all the way live from Seattle, who stayed up very, very late and stayed off all the whiskies for us to stay up this late. Founder and all-round legend and familiar face to Oak Barrel punters, Mr. Dave Vitale. Gentlemen, how are we doing from all around Australia and the world?
Pretty good, pretty good.
I'm
Pretty
good.
excited to be here.
Very good. It's good. It feels like a little while since we've done this. Dave, you've obviously done a few tastings here at the Oak Barrel, a few fairs and all that sort of thing. You're living in America right now, breaking the brand over there. How's it been in America? I mean, apart from a few of the obvious things, but like focusing on the brand more so than anything else.
Yeah, it's been very exciting. Like I think if I kind of think of that first tasting that we did in the Oak Barrel, probably in 2014, I'm going to say within 12 months of launching, to kind of think of what we've achieved in the States in that same sort of time frame is pretty mind-blowing. I don't kind of think of it that way. It's always just a march out the door, trying to find the next sale at the moment. But we've launched in 11 states. We're kind of ranged in major retailers. Up until recently, we had a pretty thriving on-premise sort of presence in bars and restaurants around, New York, Chicago, Southern California, San Francisco, Seattle. So, we've taken all of the things that we've learnt about, building the brand in Australia and just trying to apply that around the world. There's a few differences. I think Americans see themselves as one country, but I think it's probably more like Europe than they kind of give themselves credit for. Maybe they don't see it as a credit, but every state is very different, not just from a regulatory perspective, but also from a cultural point of view. So just trying to communicate things 11 times over to 11 different audiences has been interesting. Like it's not something that we kind of have to do in Australia or anywhere else in the world, in fact, but it's bloody exciting.
Yeah. So is it true, like in Australia, when people like ourselves visit Tasmania, we have to speak a little bit slower? Do you have different accents that you put on for different states in America?
Yeah, I have to learn to enunciate my R's everywhere I go. That's the big one. And I generally try and slow down because I'm pretty excited about what we're doing. So, just getting people to keep up with my excitement, which is sometimes a little, like it is difficult. But, the flip side of that is that not many people hate Australians. So I can kind of put the Aussie charm to work,
Yeah. Excellent. Well, A quick g'day to everyone joining us in the Zoom chat and also on the Facebook, to David Andor, Caroline Taylor, to Adam Sortis and Matthew Lord jumping in there. Now, a few lucky people, we are well and truly sold out for tonight, but a few of us have some tasting kits in front of us. And once again, anyone who saw my early tasting kits, they were pretty messy. And so obviously I haven't made these ones. We get professionals to make them now. So big thank you to Kathleen and the team at Nipper Courage. We're going to talk a little bit about Starward, the history. We've all had a different sort of relationship and involvement with the brand, which I think is going to be really fascinating tonight. But we're going to go through and drink 6 different samples, sort of culminating in the latest single cask, the sold out Smoke and Mirrors. A couple of things quite quickly. I'll post the lineup in both the Facebook and the Zoom chat so we know what order we're in. Feel free to add any comments in there if you're unsure of where we are. And if we talk about silver linings in 2020, if we were doing this tasting in the tasting room, we'd be pouring you 15 mils, but we have given you all 30 mil samples of all these whiskeys. So you basically got a double pour, which means you can try everything about half the glass, come back to it tomorrow night, next week, have a look at them, see what you like and see how they evolve. And that's sort of why we do that. But if you do drink all 30 mils of all 6 whiskeys, please get an Uber from your living room to your bedroom tonight. Please do not drive because we'll be over the limit. But I think I want to say a quick g'day to Jarrad down in Melbourne there as well. Mate, that looks like a single barrel behind you on the shelf there that's been had its neck chopped off. How have you been?
Yeah, it's the one of the few oak barrel bottlings that we have at the distillery. And yeah, so that's in my bed spare room now, and I think it might stay there for a little while. I've been good. It's nice. I think last time we spoke, Scotty, Melbourne was still in pretty strict lockdown, so it's nice to kind of be out of that now and be back. And I go to the pubs again, get people back into the distillery as well. So it's been a really nice change, and obviously it's now summer here, so weather's looking good. It's a lot of positive vibes all around at the moment, which has been good after the last kind of 9 months here in Melbourne.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to be careful. We were just talking about before we went live about how Sydney's almost about reopened to everyone in every state now. And we're coming into summer and the weather's looking pretty good. And David might hate us and never speak to us again by the end of this tasting if we keep going on like that. So
there's about 30 different types of rain that kind of falls in Seattle. Like within a 20-minute period. You just never know what's going to happen. But fortunately, it's been pretty nice. Despite all of the other things that are going on, the weather's been good, which is one small saving grace.
Yeah. Quick g'day to Brendan and Paul jumping in on the Facebook. Lovely to have you with us. But I think it's whiskey o'clock no matter wherever we are in the world. So for those playing at home, whether you've got the packs or not, I think it's time we're going to kick off with a little bit of Oak Barrel Whiskey of the Year 2018, Starward Two-Fold. One of my favourite whiskies, Australian whiskies, or whiskies anywhere around the world at the moment. Now, just want to sort of touch on this a little bit what it is, but in terms of where we're now, a year and a half essentially after this whiskey is launched, and it was about having a whiskey that was guilt-free and for all occasions and could be mixed and drunk straight and all these different things, and really hit a market and a part of the whiskey drinking public that potentially Australian whiskies weren't hitting. As we look back now, do we reckon it has done that? Has it done what it set out to achieve, this whiskey?
I think it has. I think there's a long way to go, right? Like, I think there's it's huge opportunity for it. But just those that were drinking whiskies, particularly Australian whiskies, have certainly kind of embraced it, which is quite humbling. I think when we first started Starward and sort of thought about an $80 price point, my benchmark was like the Balvenie Doublewood. That was what I was pegging Starward to as a price point. That was half the price of some 500 ml products that were coming out of our island friends down south. Back then, and people, the big fear was that people thought that because it was cheaper, it was inferior. And I think we kind of debunked that with the single malt, so that when Two-Fold came along, there was an inherent trust that whatever we were going to produce was going to be great value for money, and more about the scale of operation giving us those economies as opposed to any shortcuts in the process. So that's been we don't take that for granted, but I've been here for 18 months. So Jarrad, you've probably seen way more of the growth of whiskey of Two-Fold, like compared to the first batch. What would be, every batch you make now would probably be what?
Yeah, so every batch now is about 10,000 litres in size, compared to when I think the first batch might have been 2.5 or 3,000 litres or something. And just particularly this year as well, I've just seemed to be making more and more of it. Like the more the year goes on, the more Two-Fold's going out the door, which is really, really great to see. And I think one of the awesome thing about this is obviously the quality and consistency of Two-Fold, but it's doing well. Like, it's doing well at all the awards this year. It's had a really successful year, and it's people are still buying it, and it's I think like the price point it's at as well is perfect. It just really like makes that accessible at the price range it is, and it's not trying to be anything too serious. And it's like it's I think it's a really, really incredible whiskey, and it's really nice to have a whiskey like this in our profile as well.
Jarrad, just on in terms of that consistency and that sort of thing, Two-Fold is a double grain. It's got malt and grain spirit in there. Have those ratios stayed pretty much the same in terms of the consistency, or do they go up and down a bit depending on flavours?
Pretty much the same. Yeah, it does vary a little bit batch to batch, but no more than a few % at a time. That's purely for consistency, but given we've put a lot of effort into the barrel regime and the barrels that we select for this, so what comes out at the other end when it's mature is also really consistent, so we don't have to kind of toy with it too much. But pretty much the first batch to now what we're drinking would be pretty much the same ratios.
And Lee, obviously, you're a little bit more in normal years, boots on the ground, going around the bars in Sydney and that sort of thing. When you approach a bar that potentially isn't familiar with Starward or isn't ranging anything, is Two-Fold the one you lead with, or is it a bit of a mixture?
It's horses for courses for sure, but I think the exciting thing about Two-Fold and why I love it as a brand or as a individual expression, probably the most out of the whiskies, it is the one that's kind of taken Australian whiskey off that top dusty shelf, or kind of taken it away from, if it was in the playground of whiskey, it'd be hanging out with the freaks and geeks Australian whiskey. And now I think the Two-Fold's kind of brought us back to kind of the normal world. It's one of those things where it's like it's affordable, it's drinkable, it's delicious, it's everything you're looking for. So for me it is Starward. I love everything else as well, of course, but I definitely kind of love the Two-Fold.
Yeah. The only word I will add to that affordable and drinkable is fun. And I think we've got, particularly in those little bit dire years of when not only very small production releases, what we consider to be quite big production in terms of the Solera, for example, was drying up. And I think there was a bit of fatigue on Australian whiskey for a few years there, about 4 or 5 years ago. Couldn't get it, it was expensive, all these sorts of things. This is a whiskey that sort of brings us back to what whiskey is meant to be, regardless of what country it comes from or how it is produced. That is just it informs conversations and it starts new ones and it does all those things, and I just love it. And comments there being echoed by Kirsten Kane on your Facebook, who might be familiar for some people with Starward as well. But is this just sort of the same question I just asked to Lee to yourself, Dave? Is this the lead horse in America?
Yeah, it depends in which state, which is what we were talking about earlier. But quite interestingly, I think our kind of reference point in Australia for a double grain whiskey is probably closest to a blend, right? But over here, the context is a wheated whiskey. And so as soon as I kind of say, well, this in America would be a wheated whiskey, but we age it in wine barrels, so it can't be, the penny drops right away. And all of that, notion of the roundness that the wheat gives it, the the softness, the easy drinking aspects of it, all kind of make a lot more sense. And, I could probably buy a bottle from my local bottle shop, even with Seattle taxes, send it home cheaper than I could sell it to anyone at the distillery bar. So it's about $30 here. So, that's US dollars, but so it makes it pretty accessible. Maker's Mark is around that price point. Toki, the Japanese whiskey's around that price point. All those trade up bourbons sort of sit at that price point. So it's an easy kind of step for American whiskey drinkers to take. And I think, as we said, sort of it's pretty guilt-free whiskey. And for those that are new to the whiskey category and certainly new to Australian whiskey, what a great first rung for them to kind of step onto to then discover the whole amazing world of Australian whiskey.
Yeah. And just quickly punching the maths in there, about $30 US is about 40 Aussie at the moment. And it's a soft sell tonight. We're not pushing anything, but I did just send out an email that it's free shipping for 24 hours for everything Starward. And I have gone a little bit hard on the old Two-Fold because it is probably my favorite in the core range. It's $66, so 59 Australian, shipped anywhere in Australia. And I reckon it would cost you more than $20 to ship it from Seattle to Australia right now. So for the next 24 hours, I'm calling $59.40 is the cheapest way to get a Starward.
And it'll get to you before Christmas.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Couple of comments coming through. Sipping and Stillin says that Fave must have drink out. Paul Shakespeare. First taste of Starward. You're in for a good night, Paul. Impressed so far. Dear Santa. Yes, I think Santa might bring. And Raf, who very much a regular to our physical tastings. One of my nephews bought Two-Fold for his brother's birthday present. Good choice. I think I've been a good influence on them. Yeah. So, yep. I think we can sort of all agree that this is such a fun whiskey and one that I know is very easy to drink all 30 mils of it right now, but please hold on because we've got a fair bit to go and you want to come back to this at the end. So shall we move on to Nova, which is, the whiskey that has defined Starward for so long. I know that you can't say it just on the Two-Fold, Dave. You can't call Starward Two-Fold the Pappy Van Winkle of Australia, but I just did. That's all right. But how do people sort of react to red wine barrels internationally? We've got a pretty good idea of how they go in Australia, and we're getting more and more used to that sort of type. Is it a selling point? Is it do people recoil at it a bit or?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So a lot of people have had wine finishes and bourbons finished in wine barrels or port barrels as well. Angel's Envy obviously have made a name for themselves doing that. And it's a very different proposition finishing a whiskey in wine as it is starting it in wine. So there's a bit of an education kind of thing that we need to do about the wine barrels. But we always lead and we always have led with flavor first, right? So to me, it's just about fruitiness, So all of a sudden you've got this fruity whiskey that still is quite approachable. It's, at a low ABV deliberately, when it takes some interesting red wine barrels at full strength later, right? But we deliberately kind of went with 41. When we launched it, and the team, we never agree on anything, but we kind of unanimously did a lineup from 40 to 50% ABV. And felt like let's just pick the number that best fits the brief, and 41 was it. So unanimously. So that was always part of the brief. But here again, it's a great value for money proposition. The big challenge, and we're talking about this when we went live, is no one knows that Australia makes whiskey. We live in a bubble in Australia, and particularly fans of the Oak Barrel and other whiskey bars have kind of known about Australian whiskey. Let's face it, since Sullivan's Cove won the award in 2014. But here we're just an unknown quantity. So there's a big curiosity. The craft scene here, particularly in the North Pacific Northwest on the West Coast and Chicago and New York, and in fact in all the states that we're in, have done a really good job of tilling the soil for us, so those curious whiskey drinkers, so that all of a sudden we can come along and give them something different that's delicious and more often than not more affordable than what they can get from their local distiller. So we're, carrying on that ethos that we had in Australia, which is this approachable, accessible, and affordable Australian, whiskey that we want to take to the world. It's just, it just happens to come from Australia, then as opposed to being, anchored in in place. Because I think if I just say, oh, this is an Australian whiskey, there's only so far that gets you. But once you start to talk about the innovation that we've done, the approach that we take, this kind of no airs and graces sort of style of consumption, with food, long, up, any way you like, is something that resonates with them. And that's really more about Melbourne and an Australian culture than it necessarily is about, the 100-year-old premises, distillery or the brook that we're sourcing water from, which is interesting and gives us lots to talk about.
Yeah. I love doing these two side by side because they're, in terms of maturation, very similar whiskies and very similar flavor profiles. And so it's a conversation about the grain and what that texture and structure does rather than finishing an XYZ and that sort of thing. Jarrad, without giving, too many family secrets away, what is sort of the production quantity of Nova in Melbourne at the moment? Is it still, would you call it the dominant release that you're making the most of, or is it a little bit, is Two-Fold catching up, or?
Two-Fold's probably leading the way at the moment. For a long time, it was kind of, they were on par with each other. And probably this year, the Two-Fold's really kind of taken off and overtaken Nova a little bit more. But it's still like, we're still making heaps of Nova. It's kind of what we do day in, day out is make the spirit we produce goes into wine casks. So, Two-Fold has definitely kind of taken the reins in that spot.
That's a really interesting point, because I've actually been using this as a bit of an example when people are asking, what have you noticed during, lockdowns and when Sydney was locked down as well. And we really sell Nova for about $90 and Two-Fold for about $70-$75 in normal times. And we sell them one for one, pretty much equal. People happily spend that extra $20 just because it's not any better, any worse, it's just different. And then during lockdown, I think people were being a little bit more cautious about where their money was going. And Two-Fold's now outselling Nova for us by about 6-1,
Wow.
which is actually quite interesting to hear that from you as well. It's something that you've seen. It's not just unique to us.
I think with the Two-Fold especially, though, I think the past year, Starward's really starting to tip over from just like one of the weird Australian whiskies to an actual, more of a brand and a household name. And it's not just a, you know what I mean? I don't know. I'm not trying to.
I do see it. I do see it out a lot more as well. So even just going to smaller bars or non-whiskey bars, especially around Melbourne. We've got a really good following here in Melbourne, but I am seeing Two-Fold in most places that I go to. It's just sitting up there on the back shelf, or as one of the first pour whiskies. So it's really nice to see that it is getting a bit more known and getting not just for an Australian whiskey, but for just a really good quality whiskey.
Yeah. And that was the intent, right? Like I think a lot of people early on were like, "Oh, will you be sad if Two-Fold cannibalizes Nova sales?" And there's two misnomers with that. The first is the market is so big, right, that like there's the point at which we're going to start cannibalizing sales is going to be a long way down the track, as a starting point. But secondly, no, because I mean, for me, this has always been about getting Australian whiskey into, like, as Lee said, a household name. And we're not, there's just economically fewer drinkers at a $90 price point that are buying Australian whiskey than there are at a $60 price point. It's simple maths. And so, I'm wrapped. I'm so excited. It's the reason why we launched the product. It's kind of, for me, they each hold a really special place in my heart. But like, of all of the recent, products that we've released, Two-Fold for me is the one that I'm proudest of, because it was the biggest, you know, and this is saying something, right? Because starting a distillery is bloody hard. It's the biggest leap we took. We didn't need to do it, you know. And so to sort of see it, you know, having the success that it's having, both obviously on shelves and drinkers kind of choosing it, but also internationally in awards and things like that, has just been really a huge, it's a huge vindication of the big leap we took.
Yeah, it's one thing I do like to do though is go back to the Nova, because that you've got that red fruit that you also see in the Two-Fold, but it's just that little bit more intense on the Nova. It's a little bit more concentrated. It still has all that classic tropical fruit that is quintessentially hand on heart Starward. But that red fruit is there, and it's, you know, two very similar whiskies, but that show in very different ways. And, you know, just, you know, spitballing now, there's sometimes when I will prefer Nova, and there's sometimes that I'll prefer Two-Fold into that moment.
The thing I find with Nova, and, you know, kind of like, it's really weird because I rarely drink our whiskies when I'm not working. You know, it's the other way around, you know, like to most people. But when I do, you know, typically, and particularly with Nova, if I've got like 3 fingers and I'm queuing up something on Netflix, you know, the Tiger King, when we thought the virus was so quaint and would be gone in 2 months. You know, like it does, you know, there's that complexity there, you know, like you know, the way I kind of frame it, Scotty, is it has more complexity to it just because of those, you know, the malt characteristics, and it's, you know, but without the intensity that often comes with complex whiskies, and sort of striking that balance between the spirit and the barrel is, you know, what, you know, the mastery that Jarrad and his team has, is just kind of getting a really well balanced whiskey to market that is still not, like, despite it being aged in wine barrels, which is, you know, not easy, and you can overcook very, very easily, quite unique, you know, like that ability to get something that's just batch after batch, really deliciously complex, but not intense. That's the way I kind of frame it.
Yeah. And of course, this was a whiskey that was sort of the second core release to market under the pretty blatant red wine name at the moment. If we want to go back, and as we're just about to get onto Solera, you know, was it a hard decision to? I mean, obviously there was, you know, a lot of reasons why you had to move away from the Solera and put more focus into red wine. Was it a hard thing to do from like a standpoint of where you started, where you probably thought Solera was going to be the gun forever?
Yeah, it's a good question. So our original Solera label didn't have Solera on it. It was just Starward. Such was my kind of focus on doing one thing well, right? So we didn't kind of have a brand architecture with those black and gold labels that kind of accommodated variations. You know, like if you look at, you know, Archie Rose's labels and Lark's labels and Sullivan's Cove's labels, they were all architected with this sort of variation. You know, like there's an American oak, there's a French oak, there's, you know, all these sorts of things, right? But with the first release of the Solera, it was just Starward. So in some ways, that was my kind of dogged belief that, you know, we're just going to focus on one thing and do it really well. Yeah, there it is. In fact, it didn't even say single malt whiskey. It just said malt whiskey, because I didn't want it to be characterized as in the same realm as Scotch. I just thought if someone says single malt, you know, the next thing they're going to say is Scotch. And so I just wanted to kind of not be Scotch. That was kind of my mindset. But, you know, there were 2 things. I think it was barrel 4. It was very, very early on. We started experimenting with wine barrels. In fact, I think the experimental cask that you guys was a wine barrel, right? The 50-litre experimental.
Yeah. Yeah, it was recoopered red wine, I think, or something.
Yeah, that's right. So the early stuff was recoopered, and they were pretty big and ballsy whiskies. So in terms of our kind of ethos of accessibility and approachability and complexity without intensity, those recoopered barrels were like, you know, I think a whiskey drinker's whiskey, but not what we wanted Nova to be for every day. So it took us a while to crack that nut. But I kind of figured that if we wanted to be a modern whiskey, like aging malt whiskey in a fortified wine barrel doesn't really talk to innovation or modernity, does it? So despite having done that one thing really well, you know, in the back of my mind, I was just thinking we need to do something to kind of set ourselves apart so that when someone asks me in the United States, what is Australian whiskey? I can say, well, I think it's whiskey aged in barrels that you can't get from anywhere else in the world. And they're big Aussie reds, you know, big Aussie Shiraz Cabernet barrels, you know, from the Barossa right through to the Yarra Valley. And that sets us apart, you know, notwithstanding the fact that, you know, Solera over here is on allocation, but sells out in a heartbeat. So, you know, people love it. It's delicious. There are very few modern distilleries that apply the Solera process, and certainly none of them are as old as us. So that, you know, in those glasses at home right now, you've got that first barrel that we ever emptied in the glass. You know, it might be in homeopathic quantities, but every single barrel of Solera, or every single Apera barrel we've ever emptied, is in that glass that you're drinking right now. And that's a magical thing to say, but you know, the other issue is that when we started, you know, there were about 3 million, let me get this right, 30 million bottles of sherry sold a year when we started the distillery. And I'd be surprised if there's 300,000 bottles of Australian sherry sold right now, right? So it's just the consumption's declined quite dramatically. We were lucky because a lot of wineries, fortified wineries that were, you know, called it early and just kind of emptied their barrels and moved them on. And so we got hundreds, literally hundreds of them all at once, which was fantastic. But today it's becoming increasingly difficult and very competitive amongst other distilleries to kind of grab those barrels. And I'd much prefer, in a weird kind of way, given that we've made a name for ourselves with red wine barrels now, to kind of share that love with other producers that can do really interesting things with them, be it Archie Rose with their, you know, focus on grains, or Craftworks, or whoever it is, you know, like that are just kind of experimenting with them and taking them for a walk that, you know, we've got other opportunities to take a walk with wine. So that's what we do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's fascinating. And it is officially 3 minutes past 7 o'clock here. So it's 3 minutes past midnight. So welcome to December. You've survived another month of 2020, and hopefully we'll all get through December as well in Seattle. But if you do have a kit or a bottle at home, it's now time to get into a tiny little bit of Solera, which we're quite heavy on the pours in these kits, so I've got a bit of a dash here each. But this has been on, you mentioned allocation in the States, I think. It's on relative allocation here. We're lucky enough at the Oak Barrel, we do get a few bottles now and then. But Jarrad, is production of Solera stable at the moment? Is it going up or down, or?
It's pretty stable at the moment. It's certainly down a lot from a few years ago, especially when we were in the Essendon Field site. We had a lot more stock to work with. But given the barrels are so much harder to get our hands on, and good quality barrels as well, and also the price of barrels has gone absolutely through the roof in the last 10 years. I don't know what you bought your first Apera barrel for, Dave, but you definitely couldn't get it for that price these days. So we're pretty cautious with this product, and we fill a certain amount of barrels per year and release a certain amount of whiskey per year. So I think going forward it'll be a pretty stable release. We'll always keep making this product. Everyone loves this product at the distillery, so we'll always have it around. But it's just going to be in limited quantities each year. But yeah, where it's at the moment is a really cool place. We've got some really cool barrels coming through, including some of the original older stock as well. and even kind of what I find really exciting, some of those original barrels being filled for a second time, and now they're kind of coming of age for their second cask use. And it's, the whiskey that's coming out of them is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. Are you finding is there like a discernible length of time longer they're taking to mature to get to the level that you want, or the flavor profiles that you want on those second fills?
Definitely, yeah. We get a completely different kind of characteristic from the second fills. The second fill barrels are a lot more spirit focused, so you get kind of that more of that tropical fruits coming from the spirit rather than the heavier pear or sherry characters and the oak characters as well. So it's a much lighter style of whiskey, but still just as delicious, and kind of blending the two together is really, really cool, because you get kind of the best of both worlds, these components of the barrels. So it's really exciting to see these second fill barrels come along.
I feel like it's like Starward all grown up. Like it would be what, we'd be drinking if it was a Scotch whiskey at 18 years of age. Not because, like in an ex-bourbon barrel or something like that. Not because of the extra time even, just that the spirit is such a big feature of that whiskey, and it has a beautiful opportunity to shine. We, as much as Jarrad's here tonight, we could have easily had Jace here as well, talking about how much effort goes into the brew house to make the wash that goes into the still that then Jarrad gets to work with. And we put so much time and attention to detail and care into making that wash, it's where all the tropical fruits come from, right? Like it's sort of that signature note of ours. And I think in those second fill barrels, and dare I say it, those ex-bourbon barrels, like it, we give our whiskey an opportunity to shine. And I say dare I say it because when we started, employee number one, Sam Slaney, was like, we should age our whiskey in bourbon barrels. And I knew that would be a good idea, but I also knew that if I'm coming to the United States with an Australian whiskey aged in bourbon barrels, it's kind of like, what's the point? So I kind of had a bit of a veto on that. We had 4 barrels for a very, very long time, 2 makers and 2 wild turkey, I think it was.
Yeah.
And that was it. And after that bourbon cask was released, there was a bit of a conversation that I think everybody had, which is like, I think we should do this a bit more. So you'll see a bit more of the ex-bourbon barrels. But, whether it's second fill Aperas or those, lighter extractive wood barrels like bourbon, it just gives us so much to be proud of in terms of the spirit that comes out, which, I see it. Those that know Starward and have been on the Starward journey for years kind of see the Starward DNA in the malts. But newer drinkers just think of Nova as Nova and don't really have a reference point for the contribution that the spirit makes, and it's huge.
Yeah, there's a lot of hard work that happens before I get the mature whiskey right at the very end. So it's definitely a huge team effort by everyone involved, and it's a lot of effort to keep everything kind of consistently at a top quality coming out. So like Dave said, it's all the way from the start, from like the mashing and brewing and fermentation is just as important as the barrels that we fill.
Yeah. So speaking of barrels in general, a question coming through on the Facebook from Daniel asks, what's the typical barrel size at Starward at the moment?
So a typical barrel would be, I guess, a barrique size. So it's 225 litres. That's what we do. We fill a lot of our single malt into. And also 300 litre hogsheads as well. So we use a lot of those for the malt, and also the wheat or the grain component. So the kind of the larger formats on that, and that's predominantly what's used in the wine industry as well, as the 225s and the 300s. So it makes perfect sense. We love the larger format. You get a much more balanced whiskey out of it. You're not getting too much of that kind of oak and tannin extraction from the smaller format barrels. So we've kind of made our style of whiskey around using these barrels as well.
Yeah, Excellent. I mean, just touching on something you said then, Dave, I'm going to throw this to yourself, Lee, as well. You know, we're going to have a few people here in this tasting tonight that it might be their first real Starward experience, or they might have had one at a bar but never done a lineup. Like, how do you feel, you know, with people experiencing what essentially was your baby, you know, the very first one that you created, you know, 7 years down the track, 6-7 years down the track? How does that sort of make you feel in terms of, you know, it still exists and it's still going, and arguably it's getting better and better every time it goes into bottle?
It's a little bit surreal. Like, you know, and there's so much to be proud of. You know, I mean, genuinely, like, just getting to market is an achievement for any distiller. You know, we were able to attract South Trade, who is an amazing distributor of, like, arguably the best whiskey portfolio in the world, right, with Sazerac. And when I was there, it was Sazerac and Bruichladdich and then Starward. So they were my kind of like two other, you know, brands that, you know, we were being pitched along with. So it's very, very humbling to kind of have people like believe in something that you believe in so strongly. And, you know, then we moved to from Essendon Fields to Port Melbourne. And, you know, if you look very carefully in the driveway at Essendon Fields, like, there's 10 scratch marks leading from the driveway to the road, like, of my hands kind of being drug away from that place, because every wall had my fingerprints on it. But you walk into Port Melbourne and it's just, you know, like, I can't believe that that's where we've ended up. And then, you know, September 2018, I walk into a bar in New York City that didn't know I was going to be there, that I wasn't told to go to because I just landed and just needed a break. And there's a bottle of my whiskey on the shelf. Like, it's like hard to compute sometimes, you know, just how much we've achieved in such a small period of time. But, you know, as Jarrad said, I can't have done any of this without other people believing in what we're doing, not the least of which, you know, people that turn up tonight to drink it. You know, like, that's what it's all about at the end of the day. And, you know, the belief of South Trade, belief of, like, those crazy investors in 2008, you know, when I kind of 2008, right? Global financial crisis, and people, yeah, this sounds like something that has legs. Then having Distill Ventures come on board, amassing a team now that, like, I can't keep up with, like, on our comms channels, who's who in the zoo anymore. It's crazy. It's just like, it is one of those things where it's, you know, of all the things, you know, it is kind of mundane sometimes, the job to be done, but I never take that for granted.
Yeah. It's been a huge achievement. And then, like, Lee, obviously, mainly because you've actually got plenty of stock of them, but Nova and Two-Fold are the ones that you get to market quite a bit. What is the reaction that you see from people who may not have been, you know, as engaged with Starward 5-6 years ago, when they try something like Solera and it's sort of all the pieces start to fall into place for them? You know, how does Solera sit in the Australian bar scene in, like, 2020 and 2021?
I think it's still. I think what's so exciting about Starward is it's still such a young brand, you know. It's like, I think the really exciting part about that is that people's opinions aren't fully formed. You know, it's not something that's you know, like a lot of Scotch whiskey brands, let's face it, they've been around for 2 centuries or whatever. So it's kind of like, you know exactly what they are. There's not really much room for playing around. You don't really kind of, you know, there's not going to be some crazy release in 3 months' time. So I think it's one of those things, you know, it's like, there's definitely a light bulb moment when people try Solera. It's definitely, you know, like, even if people are kind of and ah about one of the other two, people normally, by the time they get to Solera, they understand it, they get it, and they see the quality, that's for sure. You know, especially some of the kind of socks and sandals brigade, you know, if you start off with a double grain whiskey, they're straight away they get their nose out of joint. So it's nice. By the time they get here, they're back on the team. But yeah, I think it's cool. That's what's great about Starward, it's and Australian whiskey in general, actually. So it's really exciting. It's a cool time to drink whiskey in Australia, that's for sure.
Yeah. And excellent segue there. Thanks for teeing that one up for crazy weird things that you might do new releases from about 3 months ago. Because the next whiskey we have coming up is brand new, Fortis, and it's one that we haven't actually had a chance to present really at the Oak Barrel yet. So if anyone is, again, on the tasting, we'll get on to this one, crack this one. We are jumping up a little bit in ABV, so if you have been avoiding my 15ml pour recommendations, please try and stick to it on this one. A couple of comments coming in just quickly from Jackie Chan. I'm drinking this Solera at the moment. It's amazing with great depth and finish. Just wanted to say thank you for creating amazing whiskies without breaking the bank. Big fan after tasting the whiskey, so cheers there. And Matt Law on the Facebook, well done, David. Great to see Aussie entrepreneurs succeed, which I think we can all agree with that. But Fortis, this is brand new. About 3 months ago, I think it sort of debuted through the cellar door and the distillery website. We've seen it here at the Oak Barrel for about 4 weeks, 6 weeks, I want to say now. So I'm going to open this one up to the room, and anyone who wants to claim this can. Whose idea was this?
I'll claim it.
Well, it's just like that.
I was waiting for someone else to go.
I think you can take this, Jarrad.
Yeah. So the idea was proposed, I guess, about creating a new whiskey and a new core range whiskey as well, which obviously Two-Fold was the last one. So it was a lot to kind of think about, and we put a lot of effort and thought and a lot of tasting barrels. Essentially, what it came down to, and we kind of. It wasn't clear at the start which direction we wanted to go with this whiskey, but the more we started trying, and a certain type of like particular American oak barriques, we really started to notice that these are really cool barrels, and we're getting really interesting flavors out of them. Really kind of classic American oak flavors of the vanillins and the coconuts, but also that Starward spirit. The Starward style is there in a lot of depth as well. So this is a really fun whiskey to kind of put together. And I guess typically with our project ranges, we can kind of be a bit more wild and a bit more out there because it's a one-off release. But we also had to be conscious that this is going to be an ongoing release as part of the core range. So we wanted to make something really exciting and a really kind of powerful whiskey as well, but also we need to be able to repeat this time and time again. So we need to look at, I guess, our whole inventory of barrels and see what we can produce. And this is it. This is Fortis, and we're absolutely stoked with it. It's such a fun whiskey to put together because it's just kind of picking all the best barrels, really. And the fact that it's batch to batch allows for some variation. So I'm really excited to see where this is going to go in, I guess, the next 12, 24 months. And it's really going to, I think, when we get to say like batch 6 is going to be real exciting because we do a big lineup and kind of see how it's evolved. But yeah, I absolutely love this whiskey, and the high ABV as well just works so well with that kind of that sweeter, rounder flavors from the American oak.
So I'm a huge fan of like 100 proof barreled in bond American whiskies. I love rye whiskies, your traditional and modern for that matter, ryes. And so I guess, this is probably taking, if we talk about complexity and intensity, this is kind of dialing up both of those dials, right? There's a bit more complexity, and there's a bit more intensity coming from the alcohol, and that's carrying more flavor too. I think that, I kind of say this it's a bit offhand, but like if a whiskey aged in red wine barrels can't make a decent Manhattan, then we might as well close the gates, right? Like it's just perfectly matched. This, if you think of a traditional style Manhattan, typically using rye, and higher proof bourbons, bigger bourbons, this sort of like fits the bill perfectly for that as well.
A few comments coming through here. Amazing on the nose. Love the Fortis. Hits me like a slap into the face. Camille in the Zoom chats is going down the smoother route. The big thing for me is on this is that intensity, and I know like the textures there as well, but on the nose it's almost got like that a little bit more oak than you see in Solera and Nova, and it's almost like you see in certain bourbons when they get described as smoky, almost like that slight barrel char that gives that smoky just on the nose element. It's obviously not peated or anything like that, but just that sort of richness in the in the nose. But yeah, I think yes, Starward on steroids, which is always a good thing.
It's a really interesting comment that that tasting note, because we use a combination of fresh filled barrels and charred barrels for this, and the fresh filled barrels that we use have toasted heads. So typically with a wine barrel, they'll toast the body of the barrel, but not toast the heads. So with Fortis, we use a really certain type of barrel with the toasted heads as well. So you get more of that kind of that depth of the oak, and probably what you're seeing is that kind of that smoky oak character is coming from these barrels.
Yeah. Ref comes in the Zoom charcoaly, if that's a word. It's not, we've just invented it, but yeah. That sort of charcoaly sort of note. But sorry, Lee.
Yeah, I was just saying we've only had this on the ground for a pretty short time, but already the response from all the top kind of whiskey bars and whiskey heads is through the roof. You know, this whiskey is epic. You've absolutely nailed it, guys. So well done. I think it's really exciting. It's taken Starward into kind of a new area, but at the same time, you know, it's definitely still Starward. You know, it's like it's one of those things.
And I think it fits the range really well, all the way from Two-Fold, Nova, and now kind of Fortis at this high ABV and more intensity. So I think like especially between those three, because they're all matured in wine barrels, there really is a kind of a whiskey for every drinker. They're so different, with still being quite similar in their DNA, but there really is something in there to kind of please everyone.
And Dave, I know you call it a Manhattan in America, but with Australian whiskey in Australia, I've been selling them as Rob Roy and HGs. All right, so
love it. Yeah, look, and you know, and this is the thing. Like, given the depth of inventory that we have with wine barrels, and Jarrad's background's in winemaking, so you know, we've got the ability to talk to winemakers in their language and understand their wood policy that they're thinking about for their wines, and then translate that into like our portfolio of whiskies. So just having the ability to kind of talk their language and just understand, you know, what they're getting out of a barrel, and then how we can use that is a huge plus for us. And it's a great conversation, particularly over here to have, because particularly, you know, as we get to single barrels, which is another lovely segue there for you, Scotty, we can then start to talk about wine regions, wood policy, and all of these things that kind of make, you know, Nova the grand cru of whiskey, you know, our Starward portfolio. It's the sum of all of these amazing parts that we set aside to put into Nova to make it just so, you know, and that's bloody exciting. You know, it's a really amazing narrative that we're able to kind of talk to people about, which is unique. You know, I don't think there's anyone in the world with more wine barrels in bond with whiskey than Starward. I'm pretty sure of that, in fact.
That's that's quite an interesting thought. I probably never thought about that before. As a little bit of obscure whiskey trivia, I can't think of any other distillery that would be using anywhere near as much. Maybe Cavanagh.
Amric, you know, Amric have a pretty long on red wine as well.
Yeah,
but
you just
not as good as us.
potentially have to check with just what Cavanagh's production is at the moment, and I feel like that they might have overnight put another 10 million litres of capacity in.
There is Cavanagh, that's a good point. But you know, well, let's Australian wine barrels. There you go. I'll preface it. Or Wetfield, you know, barrels wine out, whiskey in, we like hands down, you know, because that's kind of our hallmark, right? Like our accessibility to the wine regions mean that we can have wine emptied one day and whiskey filled the next, you know, and that's that's not happening at Cavanagh. I'll give you the tip.
Yeah. One distillery that you certainly have more wine barrels at than is Wolfburn in Thurso in the very north of mainland Scotland. A quick good day to Mark Westmoreland, who's probably just be waking up now at about 8 o'clock in the morning. So good day to you, Mark. And we're officially hitting as many time zones as we can now on this stream, with Seattle to Thurso to Sydney and Melbourne. But a few questions coming through. I do want to move on to the next whiskey because it's quite a special one. And Fortis is certainly whiskey you can take a bit of time with, so it'll keep evolving and that sort of thing. But questions coming through here, and I don't know if you're allowed to say this one, but Sean asks, who I know is a very big Starward fan and runs, little internet groups and things that like to keep on track of Starward releases, said he's struggling to keep up. So how many more on the radar for 2020? How many more Excel spreadsheets is he going to go through before the year's out?
Well, there's 15 over here that are just single barrels. So he's gonna, and then Jarrad, I don't know who else has got anything on the pipeline for single barrels for the end of the year. That's it, isn't it?
Hopefully, no one else. I need a break.
Yeah, so there's the few on the water, right? Oh no, they've landed, haven't they? Yeah, they're actually at retailers. So Astor Wines had one last year, and they're getting another one. And then there's some great independent retailers in Chicago and California, New York. Some whiskey clubs over here have bought some as well, which is pretty exciting. And as I said, it just gives us the opportunity to tell that red wine story in a really specific way.
Yeah, I think so Dolce was our most recent release, and that was probably the last big one for the year. But we've got a lot more stuff in the pipeline for early 2021. So get your credit card ready.
Well, there's going to be a lot of things to spend your money on next year, I reckon. But one thing that you can't spend your money on, thank you very much, Jarrad, for that segue, is the whiskey. The next whiskey that you'll be able to try if you are lucky enough to get a pack. Our white label from tonight. We've got a little bit of tiny bit left. The reverse double, which is a bit of a special whiskey for me because it was the first Australian whiskey I bottled after I joined the Oak Barrel just under 6 years ago, after the great Dave Withers went to start distilling at the Archie Rose Distillery. It was bottled for the Whiskey Fair 2015, and it sort of came after the year before when Dave did that 50-litre experimental cooperage release, and we were going to try and line all three up in this tasting, but we needed at least 2 bottles of everything to get them out, and I couldn't source 2 full bottles of the experimental cooperage. I have one at home, but I couldn't quite find a second one, so we'll have to open that in person at some point at the back here. But a whiskey that means quite a lot to me in terms of what it is and what it represents for just my journey in whiskey. And I'm gonna put you on the spot here, Dave. Do you remember these conversations going back and forth? I know I do, but you probably had a few more people talking to you at the time.
No, I definitely do. It was great. Let's face it, you had pretty big shoes to fill after Dave, but you've filled them and made them bigger, mate. You've done an exceptional job of carrying that lineage forward, and this whiskey was a great start to that. It was a really, for us, it's the best of both worlds, isn't it? Because you've got a bit of a Pera and a bit of wine aging in the one release. So we had the double wood, which was the very first whiskey we did under the project's label. And that was shared amongst the Oak Barrel, Barron Ales Emporium and Whisky and Ailment in Melbourne. And so that was a Pera, first fill, then red wine, 100-litre Yalumba octave barrel. And this was the reverse of that. So it was red wine first, a Pera at the other end, at the tail end of it. So it was the reverse double. A lot of jokes about acrobatic moves or sex positions, but it's juicy. It's like balanced. It's got a lot of length to it. This is the 40. I'm going to say 40.
48.5.
There you go. And even those early. Thanks for letting me know, Shasta. I'll speak up a bit, or I'll get a bit closer. Even those early releases, we kind of encourage. We were pretty keen on cutting them down with water. I think Starward's Water's Friend is still a young whiskey. There's so much going on in that spirit that just opening it up with water kind of lends itself to just all of that complexity that's in there coming to the fore. But it probably would have come out of barrel, I'm going to say, at 55 or 57% ABV. I don't know, Jarrad, if you've got any kind of more intel on the reverse double.
Not on hand.
Okay.
And that would have been about when I was starting as well. So I actually haven't tried it in a while. I think I tried it maybe about 12 months ago. It was probably the last time I saw it. And absolutely loved it. It's such a cool whiskey. But yeah, so typically it probably would have come out around 56, 57%. And then knock it back with a little bit of water to 48. It just really helps kind of like, we see that a lot in our whiskeys, and especially our kind of a project range is typically around 48%. Just that little bit of water really helps everything kind of gel together, and you get more of those kind of like that Starward tropical fruit character coming through.
I remember, and I haven't tried this for years, I have to admit, and I'm getting a lot rushing back to me at the moment. But I remember one thing that people who are fairly regular customers of the oak barrel realize, I get bored very quickly. And when something is too much of it, I go, okay, this is irrelevant. We got to move away from this. And I remember the original, like double woods was so big, and then the experimental cooper was such a big whiskey. This stood out to me because it was so the opposite. It was so elegant and refined, and it was that softer element. And it wasn't pure cask strength for the sake of being pure cask strength. And I think at the time that was something I was really looking for, was something a little bit different from what had been done before. And I think it's very easy for me to stand here and claim it, but I really do nothing for these releases. I ask and I beg, and then someone eventually says yes. And then people at distilleries go and pick good casks and make it all very beautiful for me. I don't even pay for it. I send the invoice to God and he pays for it. Poor Paul Downey, owner of the oak barrel. So I just sit here and take all the glory. But if you were going to pat anyone on the shoulder, I think everyone who had a hand in this. This was such a special whiskey, and it's got, biased obviously because it has a special place in my heart. This year we bottled a Glendronach single cask as well, so it was the first Glendronach for Australia and New Zealand, and we did this as well, and that was my year of first releases, and I think that's a pretty good company for the oak barrel to put themselves in. Let's be next to a Glendronach and a Starward single cask.
Well, I'll take that company as well, to be honest.
Yeah. A few comments coming through here. Really fills the mouth and senses from Paul, which you percent. Like it's not a whiskey that necessarily yells and scream at you. And I actually think it probably didn't sell as much on the day at Bear as some of the other ones, because after you've tried 20 or 30 whiskeys, you want the biggest, yellingest, screamingest, kickingest thing ever. And this is what this is. Okay. But leading up to Christmas that year, I remember we just were selling more and more of it each week as we had a bottle behind the counter and people were doing it. Unfortunately, the one we're going to try next didn't last till Christmas this year, which is disappointing, but we'll try again. But I know that this there was another reverse double after this, I think, for another bar. Was this sort of this concept of the sherry? It was the Paris, the Pera than the wine. Was that just a bit more of an experiment, or was there a reason? Are now these barrels appearing in other things, or?
We had a bit of an existential crisis because we had this single label product. We just launched the wine cask edition, the Nova back then. What was Nova back then, and we were thinking, what are we going to do? We don't have enough sustainable inventory for Solera, and we don't know necessarily that Nova is going to be what it's become. And so reverse double was an idea of perhaps thinking about taking and making it one. So it would be, so what you have in your hand would have been Starward, which wouldn't have been a bad idea. But we still would have come across this issue sooner or later of availability of a pair of barrels. And we just wanted to kind of have something that, you know, one of the things that's toxic to a growing brand is just being out of stock. A lot of smaller producers love it because it creates scarcity and interest and desire. But, you know, that was something that we desperately tried to avoid, and went to great lengths to avoid throughout our kind of history. And we did have one period in late 2018 where we were out of stock, and that was kind of, if you think about 2018 to 2015, that's 3 years later, right? So it was us kind of looking at what we could do to mitigate that. But it's bloody delicious whiskey, but it wouldn't have solved the problem, and that's why we didn't continue going down that path. And so the first releases were double woods, which was sherry into wine, and the reverse double, and this is for Mick. The reverse double is wine first, Apera second.
Yeah, and if you weren't drinking as much Starward as I was back then, the double woods were quite mythical. You know, they were these big, quite rare, sometimes, you know, very, very small runs under the white label. And so the reverse double was a bit of excitement, and they were thankfully slightly bigger barrels, because we did get 248 out of this,
Yep.
Which is more than the 54 or something that came in the oak barrels first experimental cooperage. But yeah, definitely a whiskey to savor. I can't sell you any because they don't exist anymore. So enjoy it while it's here now, which is what whiskey is for, obviously. And we are running a little bit late, so I'm going to move on to the final whiskey of the night. The reason, the sort of justification that I got into an argument to get Jarrad and Dave and everyone onto a stream here today. It took 5 years, basically, for us to bottle another Starward. And it's not out of for lack of trying. I know, Dave, after that reverse double, we thought we'd take a year off because we'd done 2 in a row, and you guys were getting incredibly busy, and those stock shortages were becoming quite prominent. And we were sort of having these conversations about, you know, we could potentially bottle a single cask red wine barrel at cask strength, but, you know, essentially a cask strength version of Nova, but that really wasn't what we'd done with the previous releases. There was something a little bit different and interesting. And so we sort of said with yourself and Slats at the time and all those people, let's wait and hold until we find something that is really, really special and interesting. And it was about January last year that those discussions really started to ramp up a bit and go, actually, we might have some stuff now and we're ready to do it. And yeah, kept talking, and it was really, sort of November last year, then January this year that poor Jarrad, I got Jarrad's phone number, which caused him a bit of drama. We had a few long chats about what we wanted to do. And the result is the Smoke and Mirrors, what I'm calling the 13-hour trilogy. It's taken a long while to find the right cast for this one. But a mixture of, I think, a whiskey that really summed up the relationship between the oak barrel and Starward, with some very, very old stock in there, that concept of experimentation, that having fun, a whiskey not just made by the distillers and the blenders, but the bartenders who are messing around and trying things with that whole concept of smoke and mirrors. So as I call this a little bit, Jarrad, and this is certainly a whiskey that benefits from time and air, and maybe even a dash of water. But Jarrad, just quickly where Smoke and Mirrors came from and why you decided it was a good idea to release it to us.
We needed a really good whiskey for a really good bottle shop, so that's kind of how you guys got their hands on this one. So the story of Smoke and Mirrors goes back to probably must have been early 2015, I think, because I remember coming into Starward just a couple of weeks before I started there. I'd already gotten the job, and I was hanging out at the bar with Jason and Ian, and they showed me this whiskey. It was called Smoke and Mirrors, and They wouldn't give me any information about it, and it was a really, really delicious whiskey. And it turned out to be, later finding out, it was just all these samples that they'd thrown together in a container and bottled. I think there was 4 bottles of it, maybe sitting behind the bar. But it was incredible. It was incredible. So it was a mixture of a Pera, wine cask, and probably whatever else they were sampling at the time. And then so kind of that's kind of where the name stems from with this one. There was a few 50-litre barrels lying around from really like early day stock. And it's not something we use anymore. We don't fill any 50 litres, and we haven't in a very long time. And there was five casks in particular that were just kind of floating around, didn't really have a home. And they were too good to kind of put into the blend and blend away. So I decided to get them out, put them all together, and marry them all together in an old second fill Pera cask. And I think it's just incredible, because some of the stock was, by the time of bottling, one of the barrels wouldn't have been far off 10 years old. So we don't have barrels that old hanging around the distillery. So it was really nice to kind of put these barrels together and do something really special with the whiskey, because it deserved to go into a special bottling like this, because it's something, we don't really see much of anymore around Starward. There's the really intense and depth of flavour in this. And I kind of like to say, like, with our maturation process, once we get beyond kind of 6 years in barrel, which not many barrels see that age, we kind of get these like kind of tertiary flavours of coffees, dark chocolates. And I think it was really cool to kind of see these flavours come out in this whiskey, because it's still Starward. You smell it, you taste it. It's a classic Starward whiskey, but it's not Starward whiskey that you kind of see today with our core range. So it's an absolutely delicious whiskey, and this 3/4 bottle that I have is the distillery bottle, but I don't think it's going to make it back there, because I'll probably finish most of it tonight.
Favorite drink for me, Jarrad.
Yeah, I'll save a little sample for you, Dave, when you're back here, and we'll drink it together.
2050 or something.
Yeah.
I did have a grand hopes of trying to get you some samples out there, Dave, of the old reverse double and things. I just couldn't quite figure out how that was going to get there in time from when the packs came in about a week ago. I was like, we'll just treat him mean this time. But you would obviously remember those smoke and mirrors and that sort of that playfulness that people were having at the distillery back then. That's what we've tried to sort of to capture in this. And I agree, Jarrad. There's so many layers and complexity. I remember talking to you. We had a discussion early on about, do we water this? It's at 57.5. Do we water it down to about 52? Because that's actually where I thought it was singing best. I'm actually glad we didn't in the end, because I actually quite like it at 57.5 once it was in bottle. But I just remember those early ones, there was so much going on, and you could tell some of it was very, very old, and some of it was a little bit more, was younger, and all these sorts of things. But it sort of, for me, sums up the playfulness of everything we love about Starward. I mean, Lee, have you tried this before?
No, first time.
And what are your first impressions? It's already sold out, so you don't need to be nice.
No, it's delicious, obviously. But yeah, it's funny. It's trying it after the last one is really interesting, because there's definitely elements of the Fortis in there, but definitely reminiscent of the previous one as well. So it's interesting. So what were the 3 barrels that were in it?
There was, I can tell you exactly what they are.
I love that it's very Starward in that it's got smoke written on the label and doesn't have any smoke inside the bottle. It's great. Very Starward. I love it.
I actually didn't think about that, and I put up a few teasers, and then someone's like, "Oh, releasing something peated Australian." I was like, "Oh shit!" I stuffed this up because I had this image of smoke behind this silhouette. But so it was 2 first fill of Pera, 2 second fill of Pera, and 1 Pedro Jimenez barrel, and the PX barrel is the very early one, which was actually distilled on the 1st of November 2010.
1st of November 2010. Geez,
So when it
I
was
reckon
bottled,
I might have had to.
yeah, bottled in the last week of October. Probably wasn't sitting in barrel. It was probably sitting in tank or something. But when it went into bottle, it was about a week shy of what it would have been its 10th birthday.
Wow.
Would you have filled that one, David?
I was just thinking, like, I mean, those PX barrels are responsible for at least half of these grey hairs on my head, I'm sure. Nearly centers broke. There were a lot of things that nearly centers broke, but that was one of them. But 2010, I'm just trying to think. Like, I'm sure, like, I was still distilling back then. I'm sure I was, because, like, I'm just thinking out loud. Like, we started distilling at the beginning of that year, so the 20th of January 2000 and am I getting my dates mixed up? Yeah, no, it was 2010. I'm sure.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
So it may well have had my cuts on them, which weren't necessarily the best compared to the way we do them now anyway. But bloody good whiskey.
Yeah. I get a lot of, and it's funny, Jarrad, you were saying it still tastes like Starward. I actually put this in front of a lot of people who are very big Starward fans, people like Matt Bailey and Daniel Hutchins-Reid have been drinking Starward for a long, long time. And they struggled to pick it as Starward because they thought, it tastes like old Starward, but it can't be old Starward because they wouldn't be around anymore. So they were trying to pick what it was. And I think that if you'd only tried Two-Fold and Nova, once you knew it was Starward, you go, okay, but it'd be very hard to pick blind. Whereas I think Fortis, that's Starward through and through. And Jackie Chan, the brown sugars and that sort of thing, 100%. I get a big swing on here. And just very, very quickly to those of you who are in the Zoom chat and watching on the Facebook, I did send out an email to everyone saying we're doing free shipping. I didn't put in that email that I've just released 6 bottles of the Smoke and Mirrors on the website now. So that's just for you guys if you want it. They'll be going back into the archive in about 3 hours if you don't take them up. But basically, these are staff allocations. After this, there'll be 6 bottles left, which will probably go into the archive and open at tastings over the next few years. So if anyone Oak Barrel stuff is watching and you didn't already buy one when I told you to, it's too late. I've just released them. So that's all right. But look, a whiskey I love, and I think a whiskey that sums us up. And I know, Dave, we asked you for an hour, and we've gone well longer than that. So we might wrap up here, unless anyone's got some very final questions. But mate, a big thank you not only for coming out tonight, and you've probably got to be up in about 3 hours to get back on that American grind, but for everything you've done, not just with Starward and all the people that have worked with Starward, but for the industry. And I know I've mentioned this to you before, the way just conversations we've had over the years, just about life and business and everything. It's, I don't think you should ever forget how much of an influence you've had on the people in the industry and the people outside that as well. So it's a huge feather in your cap, and you should be very proud of what you've done and what we're all sure you're going to achieve in the future.
Oh, thanks, mate. That means a lot. I really appreciate that. And thank you so much for your support.
It's a pleasure. And I think hopefully, which is always very exciting, we've had a few newcomers getting into Starward for the first time tonight, which is always very exciting. So, it feels like for me, and with the way we're talking about this, a bit of an end of a journey, but it's definitely not the end of the journey. And we maybe we close this trilogy, and now we try and convince you to do some exclusive bottled cocktails or so that sort of stuff. Now we can do that.
You've got to go to the other end of the bookshelf, right? Like we've kind of stretched out that way, but maybe put something on the other side of Two-Fold.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I mean, there is a conversation that I had when we were talking about what we could possibly do that I did ask Jarrad for, that was shut down pretty quickly. So he might not remember what it is. I'm going to keep working on him, and maybe 2022, maybe I can aim for that particular release, which when you see it, you go, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I also understand why they didn't let him do that. But but guys, thank you everyone on the Facebook and the Zoom chat and YouTube. I apologize. I do tend not to look at the YouTube comments because they can be quite weird, but I'll go back through them now. But to everyone who's come there, who's got some really great questions. If you do have any more questions that we didn't get to tonight, feel free to email me through. You've all got my email because I sent you all the link today. and we can talk about that. Dolce is coming to maybe Oak Barrel, maybe a little bit secret there. We might get a few, but I think it's available through the website as well. And those whiskies are available for 24 hours with that free shipping if you want to get it around Australia cheaper than it costs to get it from America, just for 24 hours only. Then go back and buy it from America. Guys, thank you so much for your time. Dave, I'll let you get to bed. We really appreciate it, and hope you have a safe one and a bloody great December over there.
Thanks, mate. Take care, guys.
Cool. Thanks, guys.